The Rebel Capitalist Show.
What's happening with China right now? It was, Evergrande was really in the news a couple months ago, and people were talking about how their real estate market is, call it 30%, 25% of GDP. And if Evergrande goes down, there could be some systemic risk with other real estate companies, and that could have kind of a cascading effect. I don't know, how that's really played out. It hasn't really been in the news lately. Have you been following that? And I know your long-term view on China probably doesn't change, but what are you seeing there in the short term or midterm?
Well, China has had a real property bubble for a long time. It's just astonishing how high prices, especially in the coastal cities, went through the roof. And it's amazing how many times Beijing said, we've got to stop this.
Yeah.
Then they started this. It looks like they finally really done something and are doing something. Evergrande is part of the collapse, but other people are now getting collapsed too, because things were just totally out of control. And Beijing talked but didn't act. But in my view now, the Chinese real estate bubble is finally being forced to, I don't want to use the word crack. Okay, it's going to go down. It is going down, which means that property developers are losing money. I don't own any of them. Don't own any bonds in those guys. But in my view, a long time property bubble in China is now being forced into correction. Let's use the word correction. And that means that they're obviously over leveraged people. There always are. In America in the 20s, there was a gigantic property bubble in Florida that started popping 1927. The stock market collapsed in 29,
right?
But it really started with the Florida real estate bubble popping. And it just got bigger and bigger and bigger, and then other things too. So that may be what's happening in China right now. China will have and should have bear markets. Everybody has them. America became the most successful country in the 20th century. We had some bear markets, serious bear markets along the way. That's the way the world works.
What was the relationship between Russia and China, going back just a few months or a few years? And then how do you think it'll look moving forward based on what's happening right now with Ukraine? And again, it's just so hard to sift through this in the US, or being a part of the US media and social media. There's so much noise. I'd love to hear it from you, because I know you're in a part of the world where you're probably getting a little bit more accurate information.
Well, again, George, you got to get sources from various places. You're right. So get information from the US, but then get it from Asia as well, from various places. No, I don't like saying it. I'm an American, but America's pushing China and Russia closer together.
Yeah.
And if you got out a map or a globe and you say, oh my gosh, I don't want to be in a war against China and Russia. They're gigantic countries with huge assets, etc. But we're doing it. I mean, I sit and say to myself, how could they do that? How could they push Russia and China together? But they are. America is. And George, that's not going to be fun if and when it comes to even more serious stuff. Because we are telling China and Russia, you're bad guys, you're horrible people. And so the Russians and the Chinese do a lot of trade together, and it's growing daily. And Iran, they're bringing in the Iranians. Iranians got to go somewhere. So
Yeah.
they look at the map too, and they say, oh, what about Russia and China? Maybe we could be friends with them.
Yeah.
No, I do not see
it seems Saudi Arabia is taking the same stance as well. And, with the United States or the Europe kicking Russia out of the SWIFT system, the messaging system, China has their own. It's called CIPS. And it seems as though, Russia will start using that. Obviously, they're motivated. And if you're China, looking at how the United States is playing this, or Europe is playing this with Europe, if you're them, you're saying, okay, now we know the playbook and we know how to prepare for something like in the future. I'm not saying the United States should not have sanctioned Russia, But unfortunately, in these situations, a lot of times there are no solutions. There are only trade-offs. And I think that may be one of the trade-offs.
Sanctions have rarely worked other than for a few days or a short time and maybe against a few people. Sanctions are not successful. Politicians go on TV and say, you see, I put sanctions on them. Well, they should be a laughing stock. But go back, because you made a started a very important point. An international currency, a medium of exchange, is supposed to be neutral. When the US dollar is the world's reserve currency, people should be able to use, everybody should be able to use it for anything they want. Drugs, girlfriends, anything they want, indiscriminately. But unfortunately, Washington has been changing the rules, because if they don't like you, even if they're wrong, they put sanctions on you, so you cannot use it. So many countries are already looking for a competitor to the US dollar. With George, this latest move accelerates it. Now, everybody, even people who are friends with the US, have to say to themselves, wait a minute, suppose somebody doesn't like me. I wore the wrong shirt, who knows what. So there's a huge acceleration now in Asia and elsewhere to find something to compete with the US dollar. So you and I, who are Americans, have the problem that when the US dollar loses its status as the world's reserve currency, it's not going to be good for any of us, including the US. It used to be the pound sterling. The pound sterling lost that status, and Britain was in serious decline and had many, many serious problems when it lost its status as the world's reserve currency. And I don't like seeing it, because they're shooting themselves in the foot. But unfortunately, they're shooting my foot too when they do it, because I'm an American citizen.
Yeah, a couple interesting things there. I read that China is buying a significant position in Gazprom. So you and I can't buy Gazprom stocks, but China can, and they're taking advantage. I think, or maybe they're buying their debt. I read they're buying a big equity position. Who knows if that's accurate? Because again, that's your Western media. But going back to what you're saying about other countries looking at this and saying, well, wait a minute, if they're going to do this to Russia, maybe we need to prepare for them to do, weaponize the dollar, so to speak, and we need to get a way around that moving forward. I was reading a story the other day about, and I never knew this, but after the United States dropped the atomic bombs on Japan, World War II, a lot of our allies, I read, ramped up their nuclear programs, because even though they were our allies, when they saw us use the bomb against Japan, they said, well, wait a minute, we're in good standings right now with the United States, but if we get in their crosshairs in the future, then we've seen their playbook. We need to prepare for this. So as a result, all of these countries started to develop their nuclear programs. And it seems we could see the same thing, countries developing their financial nuclear programs, if you will, just like we saw during World War II.
It's not, we could see, we are seeing, it is happening. Everybody now understands. Even if you're a friend, I mean, I live in Singapore. Singapore's a good friend of the US, but I mean, they can look out the window and see what's happening. You don't have to be a genius to see that if for some reason, and that's why there is an accelerated move by many countries, big countries, India, China, Russia, Brazil, big players are trying to figure out a competing currency. They don't have it yet. Yes, there is the Chinese system, but it's not gigantic yet, but they're going to make it huge. And that is going to be very bad for you and me and for America. And we're doing it. We're forcing them to do it by this action against the Russians, against anybody. And I don't know what's going to be the competitor for the dollar. I'm looking for it. I hope I find it. And if I do, I hope I'm smart enough to buy it. Gold is going through the roof. I don't think gold is we're going to go back to the gold standard, but who knows? The Russians have bought a lot of gold in recent years. Chinese have bought a lot of gold in recent years. I bought some, nothing like what you have or other people have, but I got plenty of gold and silver and silver. So I'm looking for, as is the world, the competitor to the US dollar.
Yeah, you know, I did.
I would say the Chinese renminbi, but it's a little absurd. I mean, the renminbi is a blocked currency. You can't even buy and sell it on the open market like you can the euro or something.
Yeah.
I own some renminbi, but unless they really open up the currency, it cannot be the renminbi, not yet anyway.
Yeah, it seems like they may be headed in that direction. You talked about Russia buying a lot of gold, and I used a couple charts in a whiteboard video I did the other day, and I noticed that they really started buying a lot. I mean, the trajectory of the curve just goes parabolic almost, starting in 2014 after they got sanctioned for going into Crimea. And what's fascinating is if you look at the chart of the gold that China owns, they started buying hand over fist at the exact same time Russia did. And now they both have over 2,000 tons, if my memory serves me right. And so I know it's not a lot compared to the United States. They have 8,000, but they've got a lot less, or at least Russia has a lot less government debt as well. And there's a lot fewer rubles out there to back with gold than there is dollars. That's for sure. So who knows what they're planning?
Well, I don't know what anybody is planning yet, but I do know they are planning. They are trying. You said, they've started buying gold. Somebody in Beijing and in Moscow had enough sense to say, guys, we better get prepared. And they have been stocking up on gold. And that will continue because what are they? They're not going to buy more US dollars. How could anybody, especially who's maybe like China, going to have more problems with the US? How could they buy more dollars? How could anybody? I own a lot of dollars, but I know that there's going to be a time when I'm going to have to sell my dollars, whether I like it or not, and put the money somewhere else.
Yeah. And what most people don't realize, and what Russia is finding out right now, is that those dollars they thought they owned are actually a liability of another bank that could be under the influence, let's say, of the United States. Whether it's your dollars, my dollars, Russia's dollars, they're all a liability, an IOU from another bank.
When you say influence, it's not influence, the dictate of the
right.
US.
Right.
The US will call you up and say, this is what you're going to do. And if you don't like it, you'll learn.
Yeah.
When we instigated that coup in Ukraine in 2014. I mean, and now we're blaming all the things on the Russians. I mean, I'm saying Putin's a good guy, but we started this. And now, of course, if you read American propaganda, oh my God, these poor Ukrainians and these horrible Russians. We started the whole thing. We instigated that coup. And anyway, you have to learn about propaganda. We all do.
Yeah, that's a key takeaway from this whole conversation. That's for sure.